deceptive request routing. Wow, that sounds really crazy here. But basically, the problem is that we're making a post request that has been sufficiently authorized to this URL, but we're not providing any data to post to their servers. We're missing the crucial part, which is the body of our post request. So if you head over to the request documentation, you can see that it has an option for specifying the body of your post request. And the key is simply called body. And this is how you can specify your post request body. And it has to be a string. So let's go ahead and use this to send our data over. Now, if you take a look at the MailChimp documentation on how you subscribe members, you can see that inside the request body, they have a parameter called members. And this is an array of objects, each representing an email address and the subscription status, called members. And this is an array of objects, each representing an email address and the subscription status. So inside the example, you can see that they've got this object, which is represented here in JSON format, and the parent object has a key of members, and the value is an array of all the emails that you want to sign up. And they have an email as well as a status of subscribed. So documentation, you can see that it has an option for specifying the body of your post request. And the key is simply called body. And this is how you can specify your post request body. And it has to be a string. So a string. So let's go ahead and use this to send our data over. Now, if you take a look at the MailChimp documentation on how you subscribe members, you can see that inside the request body, they have a parameter called members. And this is an array of objects, each representing an email address and the subscription status. So inside the example, you can see that they've got this object, which is represented here in JSON format, and the parent object has a key of members, and the value is an array of all the emails that you want to sign up. And they have an email as well as a status of subscribed. So in our case, we're going to use the JSON stringify method that we saw previously to turn our JavaScript object into a JSON. But first, let's make our data JavaScript object. So I'm going to create a variable called data, and this is going to be a JavaScript object. So we open up our curly braces and we specify the first parameter name, which has to be called members. And it has to be called members because this is the only way that MailChimp is going to recognize and knows what to do with the data that we're going to put in here. So again, let's remind ourselves, members has to be an array of objects. So in order to create an array, we have our square brackets. And in order to create our objects, we have our curly braces. So here we have an array of objects. In this case, there's only one person. Now, inside this members array, we can have a bunch of other things, such as the email address and the status. So we still have to follow this format that they have specified, just so that when this data gets over there, they'll know what to do with the values. So the email address is going to be equal to the email address that the user entered in the form. So we'll just say email address is email. And the next one that is required is the status, which has to be the subscriber's current status. So we want to change it to subscribed. So you can also unsubscribe somebody by changing the status to unsubscribed. But in cases of new entries, it's always going to be subscribed. So status is a string that has to be lowercase, and it's going to read subscribed. Okay, so here's our first member that we're going to add. And this currently is a JavaScript object. Now, as we mentioned before, in order to turn a real-life JavaScript object into a Flatpak JSON, then we can simply use the method called json.stringify. And we're going to stringify this data object. And then we're going to store it into a variable called JSON data. Now that we have this variable, then we can go into our options and create a new option that's called body. And that, of course, comes from here, which is going to be the body of our post request. So this is the data that we're actually posting. That's what comes inside this body part. And the data that we're posting is this JSON data. So now we've got authorization and we've got content, and we've specified how we want our request to be processed, and the URL that we want to send our request to, then it's finally time to check our website and see if we can sign up this new user. So let's click Sign Me Up, and inside our console, we're getting a status code of 200. So again, same thing, go to HTTP statuses. At some point, you're going to get really used to these numbers, and they're going to start making sense to you just as much as the request has succeeded. The external server accepted your request. If we head over to our lists and click on our list, then you can see we have a new subscriber. And this is our brand new fan of our newsletter who is going to be so chuffed about receiving our newsletter because our code finally works. All right, so that was pretty cool. But what about the first name and the last name? Well, why didn't they get passed over? Well, that is of course because we have neglected our jobs as programmers. When we passed in the data to MailChimp, we only included the email address that the user entered, and we didn't pass over the first name and the last name. Now, if we wanted to include those in here, then we have to again check the MailChimp documentation. You can see that under this parameter called members, there's properties called email address and status, which we've used. But there's also a property called merge fields. And these are individual merge fields for a particular member. Now, what are merge fields? Well, they are basically these tags that you can add into your email so that you can personalize your email. So whenever you've received an email that says, "Dear Angela, please buy this and this and this and this, sale now on," there isn't somebody who's actually writing all of these emails for you and putting in everybody's name. No, if you go to settings, list fields and merge tags on MailChimp, you can see that there's a whole bunch of things that you can use as merge fields. So you can add in the user's email, or you can add in their first name and last name. And these are the most commonly used merge fields. So you can say, "Dear Angela Yu, this is a sales message." But more importantly for us, we can see the name of these merge fields, and they are all caps, F name and L name. And that's what we're going to be using combined with the merge field property in order to send those pieces of data over. Now, if you take a look down here at an example, you can see that they've done it like so. So the property is called merge fields, and inside they've got F name, L name, and other merge fields. So this is exactly the same structure that we're going to be using in our code to send over the first name and last name as well. So in addition to email address and status, we're also going to have our merge fields. And this is going to be an object with two merge fields. One is the F name, and the second is the L name. And just to remind you, this comes from our merge field for our list. And if you can, of course, change this and save your changes to specify a different parameter here. And you can also have some custom ones. Say if you wanted to know, do you like cats? You can have a merge field for that, and you can target it in your code. But in our case, we just want to pass over the first name and the last name that we obtained from our form. And now if I hit save and test my app again, and you can see I can actually pass in my full name. So now I've hit the sign me up button. MailChimp server is responding with the code 200, so everything is A-OK, and we can now go into our lists and see that we have a brand new subscriber. And this subscriber comes complete with a first name and last name. Pretty awesome, right? We're building up a pretty large list now, so this newsletter better be fantastic. Now, currently, that's exactly what we're going to be doing. We're going to be through the use of two other pages. So I'll see you on the next lesson. I want you to send a success message if the status code was 200 and a error message if either we got an error or the status code was not 200. But if it wasn't a status code of 200, then we're going to send the same error message to our client. Now, we can't assume that they're going to understand status codes, so I'm going to resist sending them a 401 or a 400 and letting them figure out. There'll still be an error when MailChimp is trying to process the data that we've sent over. So we're going to have to check also in here for the status code. So response.status code. If this is equal to 200, then that means everything went brilliantly, and we can res.send successfully subscribed. Look forward to brilliant newsletters. But if it wasn't a status code of 200, then we're going to send the same error message to our client. Now, we can't assume that they're going to understand status codes, so I'm going to resist sending them a 401 or a 400 and letting them figure out what that was all about. But we're just going to send a stock message saying there was an error with signing up, please try again, or contact the developer if you have a problem. All right, so now let's hit save and let's try this again. So I'm just going to add in some mumbo jumbo, and I'm going to click sign me up, and instead of our previous situation where the browser was hanging, waiting for the server to respond, in this case our server did in fact respond and said that everything was successful if we simply comment out our body. So let's go over to localhost again, and let's try signing up again. I get the error message because we excluded our data from our post request. Now, this will change res.send to res.send file. And the file we're going to send is either the failure.html or it's going to be the success.html. This one over to here when we have an error as well. So now let's check it out. Try some random stuff and let's hit sign me up. And awesome, you've been successfully signed up to the newsletter. Look forward to lots. Failure site. Brilliant, so it's sending over the right pages. There's one other problem that I'd like to address. It would be nice if they failed on signing up to be able to try again. And if they had a big button here that said try, I can simply add a form. That includes a submit button. And this button will say try again, and it will have the action of posting to a new route, which is the failure route. Now, our form is not going to have a class, but our button is going to get some bootstrap classes, namely btn, btn large. So now let's try again to go to our failure page. And now you can see we have a try again button. But at the moment, it doesn't work because we don't yet have a route defined for the failure route that's making a post request. So let's do that here. Below our post request for the home route, I'm going to add another one for our failure route. And this one is going to have a completion handler that redirects the user to the home route. So I can simply say res.redirect, and the path I want to redirect it to is simply the home route. Then when we click this button, it will take us right back to the sign up page. So that means when I click this button that says try again, we're going to trigger a post request to the failure route, and that is going to be caught by our server over here, and it's going to redirect to the home route, which triggers this app.get, and it sends the sign up page as the file to be rendered on screen. So that's pretty much all the functionality that we need for our very simple newsletter sign up page. Now,